Hello, and welcome to another episode of the House of St. Rainy podcast. Very excited about this week's episode. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. We're going to be talking about our journey from hell to heaven. It's a journey that we are all on. It's a journey through the levels of consciousness. We're going to get into it. And there's also what I've been really contemplating lately is 3 categories of transcendence. Really excited to share that with you today. Before we get into it, just a quick shout out to my sponsor, which is my book, Finding God, Losing God, Becoming God. I am a full-time independent author. I've dedicated my life to encouraging as many people towards unconditional love, a greater capacity of unconditional love as possible. This book helps reveal what the ultimate truth of oneness is and how we can accept that logically, consistently, but also in a spiritually fulfilling kind of way. So yeah, definitely check that out if you haven't already. Okay, so the journey from hell to heaven. I'm going to incorporate some of the things that we've touched on in previous episodes, but we're going to reframe it in a little bit of a different way. So first of all, let's discuss what I mean by transcending from hell to heaven. Our soul's journey is really transcending through levels of consciousness. So there's lower levels of consciousness that are different expressions of shame, guilt, apathy, desire, fear, pride, anger. These are the lower levels of consciousness. Hell is not an eternal geographic location for people to go to after they physically die because they didn't select the correct religion. Hell is literally the experience of living in those lower levels of consciousness. Hell is living in a state of constant fear. Whether you're afraid of what's going on in your family, your community, your country, or just the world in general, you feel like you can't trust anything. You feel like everything is out to get you. You're afraid of losing your job or whatever you're afraid of. Living in a state of fear is an experience of hell. Living in a state of shame. Maybe you've done shame or guilt. Maybe you've done something and it just eats away at your soul. Living with that kind of energy, that is hell. Desire is another one. Living in a state of constantly wanting something that you don't have. Constantly living in a state of longing, in a state of lack that leads to total discontentment. Maybe it's living in a state of anger or grief or whatever that is. This is the experience of hell. Now, these are different levels of consciousness that we transcend. Each of those levels of consciousness have really distinct characteristics, distinct energies that you feel, and even their own distinct way of articulating what that level of consciousness, what that vibrational energy actually feels like, where your attention is focused when living in those states of consciousness, and particular ways to transcend them as well. But I think broadly speaking, generally speaking, all of these levels of consciousness that we're just going to call hell, these lower levels of consciousness, can be transcended in the realization that you are not the human, but that you're the individual expression of spirit having a human experience. That you're going to hear me say that a lot on this podcast because I think it's one of the most important things that a human can realize is that they're not actually just the human. That the human is the experience that they are having, the eternal one having the human experience. All of those lower levels of consciousness, those experiences of hell, those are all deeply identified with the human experience. When you identify yourself as the human, while you're having the human experience, there are so many things that will give you the opportunity to experience fear, shame, guilt, all of those levels. You'll experience those possibilities on a daily basis. So when you consider yourself to be the human, the totality of yourself to be the human, you are there's no judgment if you believe that, but you're placing yourself in the human experience, and the pendulum is going to swing. The pendulum of the human experience. There's going to be the highs, there's going to be the lows. It's a very chaotic way to live when you identify solely as the human experience. So that is, generally speaking, that's the hell experience. And then as you transcend through those levels and you reach higher states of consciousness, then you start to reach a greater realization of love, joy, and peace. Okay? And that is obviously heaven. Okay, so now if you just visualize a spectrum between the worst hell imaginable and the most glorious heaven imaginable, okay? Just picture like a straight line, and on one end you have like the worst hell, like the worst experience, most overwhelming experience of all of those lower levels of consciousness, just like that. And then on the other end of that spectrum, you have heaven. You have like pure bliss at all times. We all exist on this spectrum at some point. So you may be living in a total hell. You may be living in a pure heaven right now. It's all a matter of, well, we're going to talk about these three categories of transcendence. So I think that these three categories are really going to help you define like where you are. But predominantly, like if you're experiencing a lot of those lower levels of consciousness, you're probably somewhere on that negative end of the spectrum. And then vice versa. If you experience a lot of inner peace, love, and unity and harmony with others, you're obviously on the other end. We're all on that spectrum at some point. And here's what's really interesting. Many people actually may struggle to actually believe this, but wherever you are on that spectrum, you are choosing to be there. Now, I say that really, I want to be cautious when I say that, because there are a lot of external circumstances that can overwhelm you with grief. Or there are external scenarios that can bring about these lower levels of consciousness. But at the end of the day, it is only up to you how you respond to every situation that you face. Even if there is a really difficult external situation that comes into your life, it is up to you how you respond to that. There could be two people driving in their cars. One of them gets cut off and is extremely angry about it. Another person could get cut off in the exact same way and be totally fine with it. What I'm saying is, as it pertains to these lower levels of consciousness, even if there are external forces that threaten to take your inner peace away, it is up to you to control how you respond to that situation. Whether it's a small, isolated situation, whether it's a huge situation, it is up to you how you respond to every situation that you encounter in the human experience. Now, back to the spectrum between hell and heaven. What I was contemplating the other night is that the human experience is it's a big experience with a wide range of emotions. And the older that you get and the more experiences that you have, it's like you're just kind of on this spectrum. You might be going positive or negative, but life can get really, really difficult. It can be really stressful, especially the older you get. You carry more responsibilities. You've been carrying more trauma from childhood and all these. You accumulate a lot of pain. You accumulate a lot of pain in the human experience. So the older that you get, you become really susceptible to that hell, to the lower levels of consciousness. You may continue to become overwhelmed by different hells in your life, but it's up to you to decide when you surrender and start moving positively, heading in the positive direction. So some people may choose to experience a lot of hell and then experience even more of it. Again, when I say hell, I'm talking about fear. I'm talking about shame. I'm talking about pride. I'm talking about desire and apathy, etc. Some people may choose to experience that hell for a long time. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, maybe throughout their entire life. They just kind of stay put in those lower levels of consciousness. Now, that is completely their choice. But at some point, we can all choose to surrender. When you get to that point of such radical discomfort, how long will you let that pain persist? How long will you let that discomfort continue? How long will you let the resentment build? Let's say, you're in a serious committed relationship, you're married or maybe just a committed relationship. And if things aren't going well, how long will you let the resentment build? How far will you go into hell before you've had enough and something needs to change? How long will you work that job that you hate? Maybe at first it's not that bad, and then maybe things start to get on your nerves. And then eventually you despise going to work every single day. You wake up in the morning, you hate going to work. You do not enjoy your time. You don't feel fulfilled whatsoever. You come home from work, you're completely drained. I think we've all experienced that to some degree, probably. Again, you can choose to have that job for 50 years and then you retire. Or once you feel as though you've had enough and something needs to change, then you make a change. How long you work the job, how long you let resentment build in that relationship, or whatever the scenario is that pertains to your hellish experience, it's up to you to decide when you want to transcend out of that. Let's continue by discussing these 3 categories of transcendence, because now we can start to get a little bit more specific with what we're talking about. From hell to heaven, what are your 3 categories of transcendence? These 3 categories are purpose, calling, and healing. I think in each one of these 3 categories, you can experience a lot of hell or you can experience a lot of heaven. Purpose, calling, and healing. So let's talk about those. The purpose is for self-realization. So the purpose of your human experience, or one of your main purposes to life, in my perspective, is self-realization. You're an individual expression of spirit having a human experience. You are here for the purpose of self-realization. Now, what that means is from within this dualistic experience to realize I'm not actually the human. I'm the individual expression of spirit having a human experience. This realization requires transcending those levels of consciousness. So really the purpose, the self-realization purpose, is speaking directly to transcending those levels of consciousness. This is what I would really consider is like the spiritual journey, because this is the evolution of consciousness. So your purpose is self-realization. That requires transcending the ego, transcending the worldly sense of self, surrendering the worldly sense of self. Now that happens as you transcend through those levels of consciousness, and then you gain a greater, more expansive awareness of who you are and what is going on. So this is, so now reflect on your own life. And if you can just articulate, generally speaking, are you living in a hellish kind of experience or a heavenly kind of experience? If it's a hellish kind of experience, articulate that. Articulate if it's fear-based, if it's shame-based, if you're constantly in a mode of desire, if you're an angry person, if you're an incredibly prideful person, whatever that is. To you, your purpose is to face those feelings, process them, transcend, and it's a gradual journey of transcending your ego. So in your everyday life, now let's apply this to your life. This is pretty lofty. Now let's get to your life. This is where contemplation, meditation, this is where these things become really crucial. Alone time, processing, journaling, maybe it's finding therapy, maybe it's intuitive therapy, finding different practices in space, stillness, trusting your intuition. Now on your everyday, if you have a day where, let's say you get triggered, your anger gets triggered really bad today, okay. That's okay. First of all, release all judgment if you experience any of these lower levels of consciousness, because these are the feelings that you're here to face. You're here to feel these feelings. This is the process of transcending, is to feel those feelings so that you can transcend them. You experience the low hells before being saved, redeemed to experience a much greater heaven. Okay, so anger. Let's say that you struggle with anger. Let's say your anger gets triggered today. If you're living your life unconsciously, meaning you're not paying attention to your spiritual journey whatsoever, you pay no mind to the evolution of your consciousness from lower levels to higher levels. You just kind of live just as the human, and that's totally fine. Like a lot of people do that. And so if you live in that way and you get angry, well, then you'll just get angry and then you'll like stew in it and then you'll stew in it some more and then it will be just left unresolved or like partially unresolved. And then you'll just have another day tomorrow. And then maybe your anger gets triggered again. And then that pattern just kind of repeats over and over. If that's where you are in your levels of consciousness, if you're an angry person, you just kind of get triggered most days and you just live life as an angry person. That's kind of living unconsciously as an angry person. But let's say that you're on this journey. You're listening to this podcast right now. You're on this journey and you're really trying to grow. You're trying to spiritually mature. Okay, that's great. Both is great. Both paths are valid. I just think living life as an angry person is not enjoyable. It's not pleasant. It's not preferred. Living in joy is a lot more preferred. So, but both choices are valid. Both, you can choose either way. But if you choose to live consciously and you struggle with anger, and let's say your anger gets triggered today, if you're living consciously and your anger gets triggered, okay, you do need to feel those feelings. I'm not suggesting you ignore those feelings. No, you do feel angry. So you feel your angry energy as long as you need to, 5 minutes, 5 hours, however long you want to. And when you cool down, now the conscious path of spiritual maturity, now we process. Why was I so angry? Why did I get triggered so much in that situation? And really work through that. It's such a unique experience to you. Let's say your anger was triggered because you became impatient about something. Maybe you're trying to rush to get your kid to school or something, and they're taking forever and you're trying to get out the door or whatever the situation, and your impatience just really triggers your anger. Okay. You've absorbed angry energy on the drive to school. You come back and you're still kind of simmered in your anger. And then once you kind of cool down a little bit, you reflect, why was I so angry? And maybe in this particular scenario, maybe that parent reflects on how you're rushing all the time. But what are we really rushing for? Is it really that big of a deal? Do we really need to get so upset about being 5-10 minutes late to school? This is just the human experience that we're having. You know, it's good to be on time, sure. But if you're 5-10 minutes late, this is what you need to process now. Is being 10 minutes late worth sacrificing your inner peace to experience anger? Is it worth it? Ask yourself that. If you're in that type of situation, this is what processing can look like. It's like, I got so angry because we were late. Is that worth sacrificing my inner peace? Is being late 5-10 minutes, is that really worth sacrificing my inner peace? No, it's not. So tomorrow, first of all, I'm going to prioritize getting up a little bit earlier. I'm going to prioritize having my son or daughter get ready a little bit earlier. And you know what? If we're 5 or 10 minutes late and I start to get that impatience, I start to get that anger, I'm going to remember this moment and remember that I'm committing to inner peace, not anger. Because this is just an isolated situation that's just going to pass right on through. And tomorrow I'm going to forget all about it. I choose to be in the present moment in peace. And I'm not stressing about getting to where I need to go because I'm here right now. This is just an example of what processing your anger might look like. Versus if you're living unconsciously, you're angry, you come home, you haven't resolved it, and and then the next day the same thing happens, and so on and so forth. Now that was just like one kind of tiny, example, just shooting from my hip here. But that's kind of the idea of so we're talking these 3 categories of transcendence. That first category is the spiritual journey. So this is being mindful of your spiritual journey, mindful of your spiritual practice. This is taking the opportunity, it's giving yourself the opportunity to process all of the things that continually trigger your ego. There's a lot of things that are going to trigger those lower levels of consciousness. There's a lot of things that can trigger that throughout the day. If there are ones that trigger you big time and they're cyclical, they keep on coming back in loops, these are things that you need to process. And until you process, you'll just keep on perpetuating that hell. Okay, let's continue. The second category of transcendence. So the first one, be mindful of your spiritual journey. Give yourself the opportunity to process your ego triggers and transcend them by speaking truth. Maybe you're speaking truth into a lie. Maybe you're correcting a fundamental misunderstanding of self. Or maybe you're just making a commitment to be in the present moment and not stress so much about the past or the future, where I need to be or where I've been. Commitment to peace in the present moment. Okay, the second category of transcendence. Now we're talking about the calling, your calling. The calling, we had an episode on this earlier, but if you haven't heard it, really succinctly, I view God's will for your life, or the calling for your life, is serving others by following your bliss. What do you love to do, and how can you serve others by doing it? It's just like a win-win-win situation. So now we're talking about daily life application stuff. The first one, we're doing the soul's journey. Now, what do you do with your life? Okay. The first one is like that spiritual piece. It's like the spiritual maturity, spiritual growth piece. But now it's like, what are we doing? What are we doing with our life? Again, if you're working a job that you hate, how long will you allow that suffering? How long will you let that suffering continue before you've had enough? Or maybe you take it 40, 50 years and retire. And that's your valid choice. Again, that's not how I would want to spend my life. And this is the thing, I realize that this is going to sound privileged, but I had to take incremental baby steps to get to where I am now. And I still have a long ways to go, but I am doing what I love to do. I'm committing to do what I love to do. And I'm in build phase. I'm in building phase right now. And there's a lot of sacrifices that come with that. But it's my bliss, and it's what I feel like I'm here to do. What do you feel like you're here to do? And even if you feel trapped in a job that you hate, for example, what's the next logical step, baby steps, that can incrementally get you into a situation that feels more aligned with your calling, with your gifts, passions, abilities, and strengths, what you can offer the world, your community? So now, again, heaven to hell, what are you spending your work hours doing? What are you spending your days doing? Maybe you're a student. Maybe you're a professional, or maybe you're a stay-at-home parent, or whatever you do. What do you spend your days doing? Is it heavenly or is it hellish? And if it's hellish, how long will you let that persist? That is ultimately up to you. I know that there's many people that may feel very bound to their profession because they've gone so far, they have bills to pay, et cetera, et cetera. And I can understand how many people will feel very shackled to that situation. And I guess I'm not here to tell you what to do with your life, because you can continue that job until retirement. That's completely up to you. I guess I'm just here as a voice to remind you that, you have this one human experience right now. If you want to live it in that way, it's completely up to you. If you want to make changes, you can make changes to get yourself out of that situation and into a new situation that you will enjoy more. That is a possibility. It just takes distinct action. That's all. Now, in the calling, maybe you are working a job that you love, and maybe you do feel fulfilled. Okay, well, you're already on that heaven end of the spectrum. If you're on that hell end of the spectrum and you're working a job that you absolutely hate and you don't feel fulfilled at all, you feel like you are not using your gifts, passions, or abilities. Okay, what are those baby steps that you can take to focus on getting yourself to a heavenly kind of life experience? You choose what you do with this life. No one else chooses that for you. Honestly, I'm going to check myself right here though. I do understand that there are different cultures all over the world, and there are very different life situations than what I'm accustomed to. So there are very different cultural experiences. So I guess I'm speaking in that really Western life experience situation. I guess I should just disclaim that. focusing on transcending from hell to heaven, 3 categories. 1, we're mindful of our spiritual journey. 2, we're paying attention to our calling. Are we living our calling right now? Are we not? Are we spending most of our days in a hellish kind of unfulfilling situation? Or are we doing something that we feel fulfilled in? This is out of alignment or alignment. And this is just for you to process. It's just bringing this to your awareness right now, just by listening to this podcast, just raising this to your awareness. Now we can reflect on our lives and how we're doing. Are we doing more hell? Are we doing more heaven? The third category of transcendence that I want to bring to your attention is healing. Now, these 3 categories, they intertwine quite a bit, actually. There are distinct, differences. That's why I like to assign them these 3 categories. But the healing really ties into that spiritual journey piece as well, the levels of consciousness that you're experiencing. But I like to think about healing as its own category, because now we're talking about making peace with your greatest pain. Whereas that first category, the purpose, that's kind of like the overarching, you're mindful of your spiritual journey, your soul's journey. The healing piece is really considering your greatest pain, your greatest trauma, and resolving that and healing that. So this isn't like a daily ego trigger that gets you. This is like, when I was a child, I felt this way, and that produced tremendous trauma in my life. Maybe you've experienced great loss. Again, these kind of go beyond the daily ego triggers that we've talked about. This is what has caused you the most severe pain. Again, there are people who endure a tremendous amount of pain and don't address that ever in their life. That's perfectly up to them. These pains, of course, these traumas, they get stored up in your body. They cause physical issues. Obviously, they cause a lot of psychological pain and suffering. There's a lot of suffering that's involved with your greatest pain. And so if it's left unresolved, then you will experience that hell just throughout your life. And that's, again, your valid choice. With the healing, this avenue of transcendence, you face your greatest pain and eventually make peace with it. Making peace with your greatest pain is discovering that this pain contributed to a huge part of my soul's journey. Overcoming this pain maybe reveals something about you. Maybe it's a self-awakening moment. Healing your pain, where it literally propels you into the understanding that I transcend this human experience. It might be your greatest pain that takes you to that self-awakening moment, but you need to intentionally heal that pain first. You have to address it. You've felt it for sure. It's your greatest pain. You better believe you've felt those feelings. But processing your greatest pain, this is a healing journey. Making peace with your greatest pain is a very hard journey. I've talked about how I did that in my own life, how I had such a built up amount of trauma and resentment towards the people who hurt me the most. And it was in processing who I am as an individual expression of spirit having a human experience that allowed me to transcend the human experience. That right there allowed me to make peace with my greatest pain. And in that self-awakening moment of realizing I am one with spirit, and so is the person who hurt me, and this pain brought me to this realization, that healing journey right there, that healing journey of reflecting on my traumas and then releasing all traumas in the self-awakening moment of knowing myself to be one with spirit, that brought so much gratitude for the pain. I made peace with my pain because I was grateful that it brought me to where I am. We can get a little bit more specific too with this pain, because a lot of your greatest pain, it might be relational. It might be relational conflict between you and your spouse, you and your parents, siblings, or whatever that looks like, or your child. If you're involved with relational conflict, will you take the healing journey? You feel those feelings and you process them. You work with them potentially, or you may not. If the situation threatens your well-being, then you probably shouldn't go on this healing journey with them. Whatever the situation looks like for you, it's pursuing the path of healing in any kind of major persistent pain in your life. So now let's look at all these together. Just bringing these three categories of transcendence to our awareness. We have the spiritual journey, that we're feeling these feelings. If we still feel any hellish feelings, we feel them and then we address them. Process them from a spiritual perspective, reflect on those ego triggers, and make commitments, make decisions, shift your consciousness. Choose peace over anger. Choose gratitude and contentment over desire. Choose to reject fear, honor everyone's free will, because we're all just on unique journeys. We're all the same spirit on unique journeys. Release all fear. Choose love and non-judgment. These are spiritual commitments that you can make in this first category of working your way towards self-realization, a greater realization of self and a more sustained experience of love, joy, peace, and unity. Secondly, your calling. Are you fulfilled in what you do? That's a heavenly experience. When you're fulfilled in doing and you love what you do and you're serving others, that's a heavenly experience. We work towards that. It's a highly enjoyable experience. But if you're not feeling fulfilled, if you're not in your bliss, you're not in your gifts, passions, and abilities, you can choose to stay there and maybe it'll get worse over time. Or how are we going to take the next logical step to get closer to pursuing your calling, serving others by following your bliss? Just the awareness of this, the recognition of this. Do you feel like you're in hell? Do you feel like you're in heaven? And do you want to feel more heaven? That takes distinct action. The third category of transcendence, healing. What are the things that have hurt you the most? What's the long-standing conflict that needs to be resolved? It's not like a daily kind of ego trigger kind of thing. This is, I was really hurt and I need to face that now. I need to process that now. I need to speak truth into a lie that I accepted years ago. I need to reorient the way that I view myself. A long time ago, I believed this lie that I was insignificant, and I loathe myself. Okay, this needs healing because you are significant exactly how you are, not on the basis of anything that you've done, what you do, or what you will do, positive or negative. You are significant just because of who you are. This is a healing journey to find non-judgment for self and for others, honoring the free will of everyone. This is a healing journey. So I hope just this spectrum of considering that we're all on this map between absolute hell and total heaven. We're on there somewhere. And we can address these three categories: your own spiritual journey, your calling, what you're doing, and the long-standing pain and trauma that may need to be resolved. In these three categories of transcendence, how are you doing? Genuinely, I'm asking, like, I know I'm not going to get a response here. How are you? If you're feeling that hell in these areas, I want you to know that you are loved and you deserve to feel love. That's your true nature. I want you to know that you are significant. When you feel insignificant, when you feel invisible, when you feel discouraged, let me be a voice of truth. You are significant. You are spectacular. You're an individual expression of love, of joy, of bliss, of power. When we're identified with the worldly sense of self, then we forget who we are. We're detached from who we are. We have like a conscious block. It's such a limited awareness of self. That's when we start to we give into self-loathing, or we feel insignificant. It's when we're tied to that worldly sense of self. That's not the totality of who you are. You are incredible just because you are. I hope that was encouraging. I was just kind of riffing there. But anyone who's feeling those hells, I really do. My heart just goes out to you, and I hope that this helps to have a greater vision of what's going on and how you can work your way towards heaven. It's a journey. Give yourself grace, release judgment, and just take your next logical steps. And before you know it, you're gonna raise your baseline and you'll be feeling that heaven soon enough, if you remain dedicated to your soul's journey, to that spiritual growth. Anyways, I could keep going. I need to wrap this up. Thank you so much for listening. If this is helpful for you, please follow, subscribe, 5-star review. That is such a huge help to me. If you haven't read my book yet, I do think it will really help you on your journey. So make sure to grab that. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next week on the House of Saint Rainey podcast.